most of our clients who sell more complex, customs, big ticket items, they are focused primarily on the people who play a role earlier in the buying process, which tends to be technical people or engineers. And often by the time the conversation with procurement happens, those people, those technical people, have already had their hands on it and their eyes on it, and they are an advocate for a solution to procurement. Ultimately, it's got to run through them. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what role do engineers tend to play in a buying decision? When do you also have to go pull their expertise to help you make a decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot there. I would say that one thing I always push for, Joe, is to make for sure that I'm aware of these conversations early on, because you're exactly right. I've seen it where I kind of get pulled in at the very end, and they've already had, say multiple conversations with one company, and they've got two other bids, but really they've met with one company 7 times and already had a layout and already talked design and all that stuff. And then they come to me and say, hey, here's the 2 other bids. Well, it doesn't really, that typically doesn't work really well from a negotiation standpoint. So I try and tell my folks, whether it's engineers or whether it's, the plant operations folks, let me be involved early on. And I never want to be called the bad guy, but the guy that kind of has to go back and say, hey, here's the expectations. Let me kind of lay it out. Let me kind of be that intermediary between you and the company. Now, another point you made, Joe, was that there is definitely certain things that I'm not the SME on. If there's drawings, schematics, if there's things like that, if there's layouts of a plant or layout of a design or a gearbox or some sort of motor that has very intricate a design behind it, certainly I got to get my people involved on that early. But I never like to work in a silo. I always want to make for sure that I'm working with all the players in it. So, because at the end of the day, these are decisions, especially for major buys, there should be numerous parties involved in that from an organization. Procurement, my field, we're one part of it. We're a strategic partner to the engineers and to the plant. It shouldn't be, I'm out on an island, they're on an island, and somebody else is, and then we're not even talking the same language. So, to kind of sum that up, I want to make for sure that I'm in these conversations and that the end user is in these conversations early on, and that we're making these decisions and having these conversations, because it can even come to contracting too. So if it's a situation where, we got to have some a contract behind it, some sort of an agreement, some sort of terms and conditions behind it, I'm going to be heavily involved in that. So I want to make for sure that I'm in these conversations and that I'm representing the company and making for sure we're not only doing what's best, but that, we're getting the right solution for the end user.
Yeah, great perspective there. How, as a follow-up there, Aaron, I'm curious when the technical professionals, engineers, the ones who are the SMEs, go too far down a path with one particular solution provider, and you get looped in too late. What kind of happens? Do things get derailed? Do they wind up having to backtrack and go talk to other companies then to get competitive bids? I realize it's going to be different from one scenario to the next, but just kind of curious what kind of problems that winds up presenting.
It can present a lot of problems. I mean, especially if we're talking about a large scale project or a large scale buy. I mean, again, I can't state it enough how it's important that the procurement person, your procurement agent, whoever that person is, your procurement director is involved in these conversations, because like you said, and I've seen it more than I would like to admit, where I get pulled in the very end, or even worse, these decisions have been made and we've engaged with these companies and contracts have been signed without me being a part of it. And then there's ramifications of I like to put deadlines on when the machine is supposed to be here. And if they're not, then there's certain pay clauses or rebate clauses that the vendor would have to adhere to. So, a lot of times that if we have specific dates, let's just say that a plant has a scheduled shutdown, or you have a date where this, piece of equipment has to be here for installation for it to start running on X date. Well, if you've kind of worked with a vendor and they tell you, handshake and a thumbs up, we're good to go. And then all of a sudden that it doesn't show up on that date, that's when I get pulled in. And they're like, you got to reach out to the vendor, find out what's going on. And I'm like, what vendor are you talking about? So I think it is really important that, I like to be in these conversations early on, not as though I'm acting as the SME, but just so I'm kind of on board to kind of set those expectations with my my colleagues, and then also with the folks who are buying the piece of equipment or service from.